The Rift Observatory groaned. That was the only word for it. The whole structure breathed with a low, grinding tension that Vrexia had learned, across 37 years of station postings, to categorize as ambient instability and log without comment. Static crackled through the observation corridor in waves. The void beyond the viewport pressed close tonight, as it always did when the local rift was active, a colorless dark that seemed less like empty space and more like something waiting. The cold here was not ordinary cold. It arrived through the walls in pulses, settled into chitin the way grief settled into old bones, slow and thorough. Vrexia stood near the moss patch. She always stood near it. The habit had developed without announcement, sometime in the 3rd month of a posting. The moss clung to the inner wall beside the primary viewport, green and stubborn, improbable and alive, the only living thing on this station that asked nothing of a rank. In the pale light of the corridor, it glowed faintly. She found that comforting. She was not sure she would have admitted that to anyone whose opinion she respected. Her tail curved in its resting arc behind her, relaxed to the degree that a grand matriarch's tail was ever truly relaxed. 4 to 7 Skethri personnel were currently logging shift hours across the station's 6 active decks. Another 12 were off rotation but accessible. Vrexia knew each name, each rank, each current station. This was not exceptional diligence. This was simply what it meant to hold a living thing responsible for other living things. The station was hers. Every soul aboard it was hers. She carried them the way the carapace carried the heart, completely, without visible effort, with no expectation of thanks. The rescued prisoner stood 6 meters away, reading aloud to 3 juvenile Skethri who were technically supposed to be in the secondary sleeping bay. He sat cross-legged on the deck, which was an anatomically baffling choice. The floor was not designed for creatures with his particular configuration of limbs, but he had been doing it for weeks now, and the juveniles had stopped finding it remarkable. They pressed close around him, their small tails lifted in the distinctive posture of attentive young, arched, stilled, ready to respond to anything. He held the book with both hands. His voice was quiet, unhurried. It moved through the words with the same patient confidence he brought to everything that did not constitute a crisis. Vrexia watched him. He got cold easily. She was aware of this because she had been forced to become aware of it, first by the blanket requisition he had filed through the station's supply channel, then by the second blanket requisition 3 weeks later, then by the quiet observation that he always positioned himself near heat sources when available, like a creature that had never quite trusted warmth to stay. She had noted this. She had not mentioned it. She had also, in a logistical decision that she declined to examine closely, ensured that the observation corridor's thermal output was slightly higher than standard regulation required. He asked if her molt was painful. No one asks. That was a thing she had written in no report. It sat in her somewhere without a formal category, without a rank, without any of the structures she used to make sense of things. The question had been so simple, completely without strategy. He had been sitting near the viewport, near the moss patch, and he had looked up from his book and asked, with the particular directness of someone who has decided that an uncomfortable question is still worth the risk. She had not answered immediately. She had stood very still, which was not something she did often. And then she had told him the truth, which was also not something she did often. She told herself she kept him close for standard reasons. Prisoner welfare, intelligence value, administrative convenience. Her tail settled, comfortable and unguarded. You already know something is wrong with this picture. Stay with it. The moss patch glowed green. Steady. Patient. She had been watching him for 11 minutes when he looked up from the book, and the 3 juveniles looked up because he did. And the corridor went quiet in the way that corridors go quiet when something has shifted and no one yet knows what. He was still holding the book. His nostrils flared once. Testing the air. The station's emergency klaxon had a 4-second delay between threat detection and alarm activation. Vrexia had always considered this acceptable. In the next 4 seconds, she would reconsider every assumption embedded in that word. The bone harvester came through the lower cargo seal. She had read the classification reports. TH-25. Designation, bone harvester. An autonomous scavenging construct, decommissioned in this sector some 60 years prior, theoretically inert. The reports described it in precise, measured language. 4 meters at the shoulder, skeletal frame architecture, self-repairing calcium alloy structure, primary function the processing and extraction of biological skeletal material from whatever it encountered. The reports also described it as neutralized. Vrexia filed a brief, comprehensive note in her mind regarding the reliability of 60-year-old decommission reports. The construct moved through the lower corridor in absolute silence. This was, her species biology informed her before her mind fully caught up, deeply, structurally wrong. 4-meter constructs did not move silently, and yet her peripheral vision, which extended past 200 degrees without effort, caught it before the station sensors registered anything. A shape too large and too deliberate threading between support pillars with a precision that suggested awareness, not just automated function. The 3 juveniles saw it 2 seconds later. The corridor broke open with sound, juveniles shrieking, personnel shouting from adjacent decks, the flat crack of the alarm finally reaching its moment. Skethrai instinct is fast. The 4 to 7 personnel on active shift were moving before conscious thought had finished forming. Vrexia herself had already begun pulling the juveniles back, her tail sweeping wide to gather them, her authority cutting through the noise with a single sharp command. She did not look at the human. There was no reason to look at the human. He was a prisoner, a recovered prisoner of no tactical value, soft-bodied, cold-blooded in the metaphorical sense if not the literal one, a creature who read picture books to young children and asked if molting hurt. She was already calculating evacuation vectors, running the arithmetic of personnel positions against the construct's movement trajectory, assessing which sealed bulkhead offered the best defensive angle. Then the emergency lights caught something beneath his skin. She looked. She could not have said why she looked, except that her peripheral range caught the motion and her pattern recognition systems flagged it as wrong in the same way the construct's silence had been wrong. Something moved under the surface of his arms. Not muscle, not tendon, a fine, branching network of shapes, angular and precise, rerouting, rearranging, settling into configuration. Subdermal, deliberate, not biological. He set the book down carefully. He was not still in the way of someone frozen. He was still in the way of something that had finished deciding. The distinction arrived in Vrexia's understanding like a cold key in a lock she hadn't known was there. He moved. He crossed the floor in 4 steps. What happened in the next 11 seconds, Vrexia would reconstruct later from memory, from sensor logs she reviewed 3 times, from the accounts of 6 personnel who had witnessed it directly and agreed on almost none of the details. The human intercepted the construct before it reached the juveniles. He drove one shoulder into the lower frame with a force that her instruments would later confirm exceeded anything his body mass should have produced. He locked his hands around the construct's primary strut. He did not stop moving. The construct swung. The bone harvester, 4 meters and calcium alloy, experienced the wall. Then the opposite wall. Then the viewport. He hurled the body through the viewport. The construct's frame hit the transparent steel in pieces. The viewport held, rated for void pressure, not for this, but it held, and the construct components scattered across the exterior ledge and were taken by the static dark beyond. Her tail went rigid. The stinger curled inward. Her whole body made a decision her mind had not yet authorized. It registered the figure across the corridor as a threat before recognition arrived to correct it. The juveniles had gone completely silent. The corridor smelled of ionized air and something hot and mechanical. The stinger rattled once, brief and involuntary, and then stilled. The man who reads bedtime stories stood in the wreckage. He looked around the corridor slowly, the way someone looks when they are assessing whether a job is complete rather than surveying what they have done. The subdermal lines beneath his skin were already quieting, withdrawing back to invisibility. He looked like himself again. Soft, careful, the kind of person who remembers which blanket is warmest. "I'm sorry about the mess," he said. He was looking at the scattered debris of the construct. His voice carried the same register it used when he was apologizing for mispronouncing a Skethrai word, or for accidentally leaving a cup in a workspace that wasn't his. Vrexia did not move. The moss patch sat in the corner of her vision. She had not looked at it directly. She did not need to. 3 months ago, she had noticed flowers forming in one corner of it. Small, pale, persistent things that had no biological reason to bloom in a climate-controlled corridor on a void station. She had not logged them. She had no category for them. She had no category for this either. The green held. The flowers held. Her tail slowly, carefully, uncurled, and came to rest in the only arc it seemed to find natural now. Not guarding, not threatening. Arched, quietly, over the space beside her, where he would, in a few minutes, come to stand. I am the most powerful being in this sector. He makes me feel small.